Hello everyone, welcome to the 9th Annual Central Valley Chemical Safety Day Training. My name is Alvin Lal and I am the HazMat Manager for Stanislaus County and also one of the co-chair for Central Valley Chemical Safety Day Committee. Due to COVID-19 pandemic, this year's Safety Day training is not live in person, instead it is a virtual training. This committee and its dedicated members have worked hard to put together our first virtual training. It is our goal, as in previous years, to provide a training platform that will meet your employment training requirements as well as enhance your knowledge in the field of chemical safety. As I mentioned, my name is Alvin Lal, the HazMat Manager for Stanislaus County Environmental Resources. I'm also a CSDI Certified Hazardous Materials Specialist, and I oversee all the CUPA programs for this county, site mitigation, as well as emergency response and the household hazardous waste program. I'm also a registered environmental health specialist, and I was a health inspector for many years before I transitioned into the HazMat division about 10 years ago. As also the co-chair for the Central Valley Chemical Safety Day, and I have a wealth of experience in hazardous materials, food safety, audits, inspections. I have a bachelor's degree in biological science with a concentration in microbiology, and I graduated from CSU Stanislaus. I have an extensive experience, and my expertise range from the CalARP program, as well as CUPA inspector, environmental health inspector, and also as an emergency responder. Today I will be briefly talking about what a regulator looks for in the audit or inspection of your facility. CUPA inspections of your facility are mandated by state and federal regulations or statute, which is the Health and Safety Code. These inspections can be unannounced inspections, or it can be a joint inspection with a state or a federal agency. All inspection and enforcement data based from your inspections is tracked by CalEPA on their website, which is CERS, and that stands for California Environmental Reporting System. Just like a CUPA does inspection on your facility every 3 years, the CUPA gets evaluated in an audit form or audit format by the state agency led by CalEPA and other state agencies. As you saw in the previous slide, the acronym BDO. What does BDO stand for? The responsible state agency for each CUPA program is the state BDO. And they are as follows. For the Hazardous Material Business Plan Program, the state BDO is the California Office of Emergency Services, known as CalOES. For the CalARP program, it is the state agency CalOES. For the underground storage tank, it is overseen by the State Water Resources Control Board. And for the APSA, which is the Above Ground Petroleum Storage Act, that state agency oversight is by the Office of the State Fire Marshal, and the Hazardous Waste Program, as well as the tiered permitting, is oversight by Department of Toxic Substance Control, known as DTSC. So in other words, state BDO is the board, department, and office. So board would be State Water Resources Control Board. Department can be Department of Toxic Substance Control. And office, O, stands for CalOES, California Office of Emergency Services. And the Office of the State Fire Marshal Office. Now let's focus our attention to PSM, RMP, and CalARP program. Who must comply, and what does this mean? PSM is under the CalOSHA program, which stands for Process Safety Management. RMP is the Cal EPA's, Fed EPA's Risk Management Program, which is similar to the California's CalARP program, which stands for California Accidental Release Program. Who must comply? So if you're a facility and you have a acutely hazardous chemical on your site and it meets or exceeds the threshold quantity of a state and federal listed hazardous material, you may be subject to the PSM, RMP, or the CalARP program. So for example, anhydrous ammonia, which is a listed chemical in all three programs for CalOSHA, RMP, and CalARP, the quantity for the threshold at federal level or federal level and CalOSHA level is 10,000 pounds. At state level under the CalARP program, the anhydrous ammonia, the threshold level goes down to 500 pounds. So in other words, if you have a facility of anhydrous ammonia of 10,000 pounds or more, you are subjected to all three programs, PSM, RMP, and CalARP. But if you are a facility with under 10,000 pounds, you'll only be subjected to the California CalARP program. If you are under 10,000 pounds, you are subjected to Prevention Program 2 or could be a 1, depending on where your site is. But if you are 10,000 or more, you will be a Program 3 under the CalARP program. There are periodic requirements for the three programs. They could be annual reviews, 3-year requirements, or 5-year requirements. For your annual review and updates, things that can be done under that annual review are your emergency action plan or your emergency response plan. The second one could be your standard operating procedures. These are some of the examples that needs to be looked on an annual basis, and if there are any changes, it needs to be updated and certified. There are also requirements that you have to do every 3 years. For example, employee training or refresher training for your employees needs to be conducted every 3 years. Your compliance audit under the CalARP requirements needs to be conducted every 3 years. There are also 5-year requirements, which means your RMP and your CalARP needs to be certified and submitted to your local CUPA every 5 years. And in that submittal, you have to do your hazard assessment, your process hazard analysis or hazard analysis. And in that process hazard analysis or your hazard analysis under Program 2, external events such as seismic evaluation or terrorism can be discussed in the external event protocol or section every 5 years. So in addition to those requirements, the annual requirements, 3-year requirements, and 5-year requirements, CUPA regulators also inspect all your programs. So what do you expect when a regulator shows up at your facility and is ready to conduct an inspection? As I mentioned earlier, these inspections can be announced or unannounced. So how would you prepare for an inspection? What would you do? What questions would the auditors or the CUPA regulators would be asking, and what documentation they would be looking at, as well as interviewing your employees for knowledge of the program. So let's focus on CalARP, RMP, and PSM. So when CUPA, which stands for Certified Unified Program Agency, and CUPA could be your local regulator, what they look for during an audit inspection. One of the things that they look for could be your process hazard analysis, which is under Program 3 of the CalARP regulation, Section 27, under Section 2760.2, Article 6 of the Title 19 of the California Code of Regulations. So under PHA, or process hazard analysis, or it could be hazard analysis under Program 2 under the Section 2755.2, they will be looking at your at your completeness of your recommendation. Who conducted the PHA or HA? Was it a qualified person who has a knowledge of the process? And also, was the process conducted by a team of knowledgeable people that knows the process as well as conducting the PHA? Was there a signing sheet of all the participants and the range of management, including maintenance workers that were part of the PHA? The regulators will look for the recommendations that came out of the PHA. They will look for who was assigned, actual completion date, or the completion date, and was all of this documented. They will also look at your compliance audit. Per regulation, you need to provide the local regulators the last 2 compliance audits. And as the same thing with PHA, they will look for completeness, assignments of the people responsible, who was assigned, the completion date, and documentation to show that all the recommendations that came out of the compliance audit or the process hazard analysis was complete and true. They may also look at your daily logs of your compressors in the engine room, and are the daily logs filled out thoroughly, or it was just a task? Do the maintenance workers know and are knowledgeable to know and understand what things are being recorded on the daily logs? The regulators could, in fact, interview the employees for their knowledge and competency of the knowledge of the process, as well as to test if they are getting trained a refresher training every 3 years. They could also ask for calibration results for the ammonia sensors. Per your program description, you have to state how many times and what's the frequency to test the ammonia sensors. Per manufacturer's recommendation, it could be a year, but a company policy could dictate the ammonia sensors be calibrated and tested every 6 months. So according to your program, that's what the CUPA audit or regulator will be going by. Whatever you say in your program stands. They could also be looking at your inventory of the threshold of the process chemical that you have, and you're reporting it as a acutely hazardous chemical, and it's in the registration, either in Program 2 for the local regulator or Program 3 under the CDAX registration at the Cali PA. So these are some of the examples. Continuing from the previous slide, what else could a CUPA regulator be looking at under your PSM, RMP, or CalARP program? So further expanding, depending on whether you're program 2 or 3, the regulator could look very thoroughly of your maintenance program under program 2, prevention program 2, or your mechanical integrity program under prevention program 3. So what are the things that a maintenance or mechanical integrity contain? Well, first of all, you need to have a written program thoroughly written and describing how you're going to maintain the integrity of your system, of your equipment of the process? What is the frequency of testing? What is the employee involvement in maintaining the process? What are the frequency of the tests? Who is conducting this mechanical integrity or maintenance? How often are you calibrating your equipment? Are your maintenance technicians or your maintenance people trained and adequately certified to do maintenance? Are you performing maintenance in-house, or is it an outside contractor maintaining your equipment? As I mentioned, inspecting and testing, like what's the frequency? Which equipments are being looked at? Is it following the recognized and generally accepted good engineering practices, which is the REGA-GAP? As I mentioned, also the frequency. Is it done monthly, weekly, yearly, every 6 months, or a year? And who is conducting it? And if the tests are in accordance to the IIAR guidelines or the Bulletin 109-110 or per your maintenance program description. Are you documenting all these inspections and the testings and who's conducting it? How is it maintained? Do you have a paper document? Is it computerized? Do you have a work order that prints out every month, and based on those work orders, the maintenance people are looking and maintaining your system? So these are the things that the regulator may be looking at. Were there any deficiencies noted? And if it was, either in the daily logs or in your maintenance or your daily rounds or your daily checks, if they find any deficiencies, then how was it corrected? Who was it addressed to? Where was it documented? And in the daily logs, as I mentioned in the previous slide, if something is out of range, if your temperature is out of range, if your compressor pressures are out of range, was it notified? Was a work order generated? Was a supervisor notified? Was there any corrective action taken? So these are some of the things that an auditor or a CUPA regulator could be looking into under your maintenance and mechanical integrity. So if you do a MI audit or mechanical integrity audit every 5 years, what were the recommendations? Was the recommendations assigned to anyone? Was it completed? How was it completed? Who completed it? And was there documentation to it? And based on those recommendations, the regulator could go out and actually verify it to see if all those recommendations were corrected and documented. Not necessarily that a mechanical integrity audit or maintenance work order was created and just signed off without the actual work being done. So those are some of the things in addition to quality assurance, making sure that appropriate checks and inspections were performed according to the manufacturer's guidelines or the operator's operating manual or manufacturer's guidelines, and the REGA-GAP guidelines. So making sure that the maintenance materials are adequately kept and the integrity of that are maintained. Do you have any spare parts that can be installed right away if a system goes bad or a part is a failure? And do you have any spare parts in the maintenance room that can be swapped right away? So those are the things that a regulator can look under the maintenance program. What about SOPs, which stands for Standard Operating Procedures? Well, there are 4 items that needs to be verified under the Standard Operating Procedure, depending on whether you are a Prevention Program 2 or Prevention Program 3. So how was the written program implemented? Was the SOPs written in very clear instructions, including steps of each operating phase? The regulator could also look at where the SOPs are kept. Is it accessible to the employees? Is the SOPs reviewed frequently or as necessary? Or a SOP was written and never reviewed and never been kept up according to the changes and the process. So is it reviewed as necessary? Who reviewed it? When was it reviewed? Is it reviewed as necessary or at annual basis? So a written description of the standard operating procedure should be written and clearly states how often an SOP needs to be reviewed and who will be reviewing it. And is it documented? Someone could just be signing the SOPs, but are they actually reviewing it? So interviewing the employees and understanding their knowledge on a standard operating procedures and where it's kept, a regulator can also ask that of an employee. In addition to all these things, an SOP could include some of the other prevention program requirements or some of the OSHA requirements. For example, low car tagout, confined space entry, contractor safety. Are these procedures, like I mentioned, low car tagout, confined space, were this shared with the outside contractors if you have an outside contractor maintaining your equipment or your system? Under the contractor safety, where this SOP is shared and reviewed, or was it accessible to the contractors as well? So that's some of the things that the regulator could be looking at under standard operating procedures. Management of change or pre-startup safety review. Management of change, MOC, very common in a program 3 or prevention program 3, along with management of change comes along pre-startup safety review. So when do you do a management of change? Well, management of change is done when there is a major modification of a process. It's more than a replacement in kind. For example, you are taking out a compressor, a screw compressor, a reciprocating compressor, and replacing it with a screw compressor. That's not a replacement in kind. It's a totally different concept as far as a reciprocating versus a screw compressor. So what were the changes? It is not replacement in kind, obviously. So a management of change has to be done under the prevention program 3. And along with that management of change, you have to do a pre-startup safety review before the equipment comes back online. So you have to fill out a paperwork and state, was it necessary? Were the technical basis explained in the management of change? Was health and safety concerns discussed? When is the necessary time of completion? And who authorized it? And were they appropriate signatures in the management of change? Like I said, if the replacement is in kind or was it a major modification? Along with management of change, you have to complete a pre-startup safety review. And was the change reflected in the process safety information, standard operating procedures, or your maintenance procedures? So for example, if you are replacing a reciprocating compressor with a screw compressor, obviously management of change needs to be filled out. That since an equipment is replaced with a different type of equipment, your process safety information has to be reflecting this. Your PNIDs will be changed. Your standard operating procedures will be changed. Your maintenance on this new compressor will be changed. Before you put this new compressor online, you have to do a pre-startup safety review. So that's why management of change and process safety review go hand in hand. And again, employee training has to be done as well, right? Because this is a new equipment. So was employee training done, and how was it conducted? With the new standard operating procedures, with the new maintenance procedures, and are they knowledgeable, and do they know that the process safety information has to be changed as well? So a refresher training has to be done, as well as um, a 3-year refresher training needs to be done along with the management of change. So let's say you had a major modification done. You can also do an employee training if it is due for that 3-year review cycle. And if it's not, you have to train your employees on this new equipment. And these are some of the documents that will be checked and audited by the CUPA auditor. Now, if your system has had a incident or a release, whether it could be a minor or major, an incident investigation form has to be done when completed. And what is the time frame to complete an incident investigation? Has to be done within 48 hours. So within 48 hours of any incident, whether it's a minor or major release, you have to conduct an investigation. And it has to be done in 48 hours. There has to be a team, and that team has to have a person who is knowledgeable of the process. Was a report generated? And the report needs to have a date of incident and the date of the date of the incident and the time that the incident investigation began. Those 2 dates are very critical. The other thing is you have to describe the incident. What happened in detail? What happened, when it happened, what time, who was involved? Was there a witness? Was there a witness statement filled out? Was there a follow-up? Did the employee receive any medical attention? Did the employee had missed any work? Where was it in the process? Was it outside or inside? And then an investigation has to be done by a team and thoroughly investigated what went wrong. Why was this release happen? Was it a human error? Was it a maintenance failure? Was it an equipment failure? All these things has to be discussed very thoroughly and clearly in the incident investigation. And any recommendation that comes out has to be followed up. It has to be followed up to an assigned person. It needs to be documented, and that document has to be retained for 5 years. Other things that the regulator could be looking under the process safety information or the safety information for program 2 are your piping and instrument diagrams, which are called PNIDs. Now, PNIDs are required for prevention program element 3, but they do not mention under prevention program 2. However, no ammonia system or any process system cannot be designed without a PNID, even though the regulator may not look at a PNID under program prevention 2. However, these things are required under prevention program 3. So the PNIDs will be looked at. Are the PNIDs true and accurate, and it's reflecting what the process is? Are the PNIDs updated as there are changes or major modifications to the system? So whenever you fill out, whenever you have an equipment change and it's not replacement in kind, a management of change form is filled out along with pre-startup safety review. Was that equipment reflected in the PNID? Now you don't have to go and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars and update your PNIDs. You can actually maintain your current PNID and make changes on it with a red pen and keep it updated. As long as it's dated and signed, everything is a working document at that point. The other thing that is a requirement are the block flow diagrams. Now, a block flow diagram is just a simple um, description of the equipment, where how the process flows, where it goes, how many equipment you have. For example, it goes from the cooler to the freezer, back to your condensers, um, into the compressors, to the condenser, to the high pressure receiver, and then back to your to the coils. So a block flow diagram basically tells you how the system is and how it operates. Simple, simple diagram, not as detailed as your PNID. Your relief or ventilation system. So how are your PRVs ventilated? Is it going through a common header into a diffusion tank, or is it piped outside and goes into the air? Is it ventilated into the air? Materials of construction. Are your equipment constructed in accordance to the materials constructed, and it is a standard industry standard material? Is it compatible with the process chemical? And are there any other types of material included in the maintenance or construction of the piping that is not compatible with the process equipment? Detection, monitoring, and safeguards comes along with the equipment. Are they maintained? Are there safeguards? Are there detections? Do you have ammonia sensors? Do you have safeguards on your equipment? Interlock switch, high pressure cutouts, low pressure cutouts. And then also, do you have the current safety data sheet for the process chemical? So again, this can go very thoroughly. The CUPA auditor depends on their knowledge and how educated they are in the process. They could take a lot of time going through all this documentation. After the CUPA auditor or regulator has done a thorough review of your documentation, all the prevention program elements for program 2 and prevention program elements for program 3, depending on the timing and the availability of the employees of the facility, the CUPA regulator will ask to inspect and see the engine room and go out on the process floor and look at your process and understand how everything is running according to the documentation. So while the regulator is out on the floor looking at your system, whether it's inside or outside of your facility, some of the things that he or she could be looking for is your emergency stop switch. Where is it located? Is it inside an engine room or is it outside? It should be on the exterior wall of an engine room or an easily accessible area of the process. And it needs to be labeled and easily identified as the emergency switch. Are the critical valves labeled and identified? For example, the king valve on the high pressure receiver. Is it easily labeled and identified with big letters so that an emergency responder can identify and quickly turn off the valve to stop the leak? Um, in addition to a hand valve, some of the king valves could be solenoid and could be operated automatically through a PLC system that an engineer or maintenance person can remotely close through a computer or from a control engine room that is in an isolated area or through their phone system. So as technology advances, the application and different apps can be installed on a person's cell phone, and it can monitor the whole process, and critical valves can be shut off or turned on depending on the situation. They can also be looking at the insulation and piping corrosion while they're inspecting the system. And this goes also during if they find there is deficiency and the maintenance is not kept on the equipment and insulations are falling apart, the pipings are corroded, the labeling is not adequate. Some of this can be reflected under your maintenance program or your mechanical integrity. So the regulator could be looking for your mechanical integrity recommendations. And if they find that the insulation and pipings are corroded, but it's not mentioned in the mechanical integrity audit, then the integrity of the person conducting the mechanical integrity can be questioned, and also the knowledge of the maintenance people, as well as the facility, um, whether they're trying to save money and going the cheaper way and ignoring the integrity of the maintenance and integrity of the equipment. It's very visible if the insulation and piping corrosions are not addressed. Also, while inspecting and moving along the equipment, a very knowledgeable regulator would also be hearing for some abnormal sounds, the abnormality of vibrations. There are vibrations of equipment because everything is running and they could be under pressure. But if a pipe is shaking and there's some backing up or buildup, or there's a pressure buildup and there's an abnormal sound, is it noticeable? Was it addressed? So these are some of the things that the regulator could be looking for: abnormal sounds and vibrations, where there's supports on the pipes um, at different intervals. The supports of the pipes are there or not? Are they missing? Are the pipes shaking? Could that shaking of the pipes potentially cause a catastrophic release? And if there are abnormal sounds or noise and vibrations, the regulator could ask for vibration analysis. He or she could also look at the maintenance records. He or she could also ask for, again, go back to the mechanical integrity audit and see if the support and structures and bolting down of the equipment was mentioned being adequate or inadequate. The other very common thing that the regulators cite are the PRV valves. Do you have a schedule of PRV valves? Are they changed at an interval of at least 5 years? Are the PRV valves tagged for the installation date and replacement date? Is there a schedule for the PRV valves to show when it was installed and when will it be replaced? Is there a check system in your maintenance program to see the integrity of the PRV valves? How are the PRV valves sized? Is it sized adequately? Is it modified? Are there fire extinguishers in the engine room? Are there hour stations inside and outside? So the hour station and shower stations are something under the PSM program or OSHA regulation, but it's also can be looked under the RMP and the CalARP program. So these are some of the things in addition to the documentation that the regulator can be looking at. The regulator could also be looking at the housekeeping of the engine room, location of the ammonia sensors, calibration. Are the ammonia sensors located according to what the PNID says or what's described in the process safety information? Ammonia sensors could also be included in your maintenance program, as well as in the emergency action plan or the response plan. Are there windsocks outside the facility to show the direction of the wind? And during a time of a release, where are the the meeting point of an evacuation. Where is the primary location? Where is the secondary location? Are the windsocks visible from outside of a location of the facility, from any direction or any side, anywhere from the property? It's very important. Um, some of the things is if the equipment are outside or even in the engine room, are they guarded from any type of accident or forklift being run into a vessel or pressurized vessel or any piping that could rupture and cause a catastrophic release? While walking the system, a regulator may be wearing a personal handheld ammonia detector, and they could also be looking for any signs of a ammonia smell or a leak from a system, and if it's visible or if there is a smell, then it will be further investigated. Under your emergency response plan, some of the information that a regulator may be looking for is the procedures and the escape routes been discussed. Where is the primary location for evacuation and where is the secondary location for employee evacuation? What are the preferred means to report emergencies? Is it through a radio? Are they alarm system? Are they a PA system? Are the supervisors and plant personnel involved? Is there someone at every level of supervisory notification system, including the maintenance and plant manager? So that needs to be described in the emergency response information. How are the release of a chemical being notified to the employees? Is there a PA system? Is there a alarm system? A different color code of lights flashing that indicates different types of chemicals being released? Is the plan describing the coordination with outside agencies, the local fire department, or your local CUPA, who's responding to your facility in case of a chemical release? Are different types of chemicals release being discussed in the emergency response plan? What are the personnel roles and who is the incident commander for any type of catastrophic release or emergency situation? Who is the incident commander? Is that person trained to be an incident commander? Was there appropriate training been taken and certification? And what are the different roles of the different levels of management? What is the supervisor's role? What are the maintenance role? What is the maintenance engineer's role? What is the plant manager's role? The process safety coordinator's role? All these different levels of management needs to be described, and what are their roles in a emergency situation or a chemical release? Is there a site security, and what is the role of that site security? And then for any type of significant release, is there a reporting procedure? Who gets notified? Was the CUPA notified immediately? Was CalOES notified immediately? And if there's a threshold level exceedant of a reporting threshold limit was exceeded, was the National Response Center notified or not in a timely manner within 24 hours at least? So these are all needs to be described in the emergency response information. Along with if you're a responding facility, you need to have proper personal protective equipment and emergency equipment, and it needs to be readily accessible and maintained. For example, your face mask needs to be checked on a monthly basis. The integrity of the equipment, checking, make sure it's not frayed or there's no leak, there's no cracks. The equipment is maintained on a yearly basis or at least a monthly basis depending on your procedure. And are you conducting any response with the outside agency or within the team, and that goes along with the training. Was there 40-hour HazWAPer trained? Was there a 8-hour refresher trained and conducted on a yearly basis? After a CUPA regulator has conducted a thorough review of the documentation and the system walkthrough, they will issue the facility or the owner-operator a thorough detailed inspection report that will describe the violations observed, the degree of the violation, and a specified time for return to compliance. Depending on the severity of the violation observed and noted in the inspection form, a jurisdiction or CUPA may take further enforcement and issue penalties to the facility or the owner operator. And again, depending on the degree of the violation, whether it's a class 1 and how severe it is, whether it's a repeat violation of a class 1 violation, penalties could range anywhere from $25,000 a day to about $2,000 a day. So it all depends on the jurisdiction, it all depends on the severity of the violation, and also depends on the nature of the violation as well as the facility, if it's a recalcitrant violator and knowingly avoided to correct any type of prevention program elements. So that's how enforcement may take. Enforcement really depends on each jurisdiction, and it depends on the CUPA. Under the inspection and enforcement plan, which is called the INE plan of each jurisdiction or each CUPA regulator, according to the enforcement plan, they will take further enforcement according to the violations cited on the inspection report. Mostly enforcements are taken on class 1 violations, and if the facility owner operator was a recalcitrant, meaning where the class 1 violation was repeated over time and was not corrected, or knowingly the facility did not correct the violation. So again, it depends on jurisdiction, depends on the severity of the violation and the frequency of the violation, class 1 violation, and how knowingly and not knowingly a facility acted on it. So that depends and will be resulting in the enforcement based on those criteria that I just mentioned. Well, thank you everyone for listening in, and I hope you took good notes and some of the information that I talked about was informational to you. My email address is in the first slide. Feel free to note it down and email me, and I can answer your questions one-on-one and further help you with your program. PSM, RMP, and CalARP is very important, and it's a very thorough of the CUPA programs. So it takes time. This 45-minute presentation is not enough to answer all your questions or even to go through each prevention program element in detail. I tried to give an overall view of all the prevention programs to the best to summarize it, but it still is not enough to touch all the necessary components, and it was not enough to describe everything in detail. So once again, feel free to give me a call or email me and we can discuss this further. Have a great day. Thank you.